My name is Margot Voss and I was 29 the summer I stopped trying to explain what I did for a living. Not because I was ashamed, not because I lacked the words, but because for 4 years I had watched the same expression move across my mother's face every time I said the word appraiser, a particular arrangement of the eyes and mouth that communicated with surgical efficiency that she had heard me, understood me, and decided once again that what I had said did not qualify as an answer. Her name was Beverly. Beverly Ann Voss, 61 years old, with a subscription to 3 home design magazines she never read, and opinions about every room she had never paid for. She drove a cream-colored Buick, attended the same Lutheran church she had attended since 1987, and managed her family's social standing the way some people manage investment portfolios, with constant vigilance and a tolerance for risk that was exactly zero. My father, Gerald, was the kind of man who made peace with Beverly's decisions by deciding he had made them himself. He was not cruel in the way she was. He was absent in a softer way. Busy with the garage, busy with the yard, busy with anything that did not require him to hold a position under pressure. My brother Thatcher was 35 and had been the family's proof of itself for most of his adult life. Commercial real estate in Columbus, a firm called Landmark Criterion. A wife named Portia with 2 children and a house in Dublin, Ohio, that Beverly referenced in conversations the way some people reference a scripture, regularly and as though it settled something. For as long as I could remember, Thatcher's accomplishments arrived at the dinner table pre-approved and pre-celebrated. His promotions were occasions. His decisions were discussed in the first person plural, as though the family had made them together. When he bought his first investment property at 32, my mother lit a candle at church. And me. I was the one who went sideways. Not by her measure in some catastrophic direction. I did not drop out of college or develop a habit or vanish into something ungovernable. I simply made choices she had no grid for. I took an art history degree from Ohio State, and then, instead of law school or a corporate training program or anything with a clearly articulated salary ceiling, I sat for my certified appraiser examination at 24 and began working for a mid-sized firm called Castellan Associates in Cincinnati, cataloging and valuating privately held art and estate collections. Beverly's initial description of this to extended family was, "Margot works with antiques," which was not wrong exactly. But it was designed to sound diminished, the way you might describe a surgeon as someone who works with knives. What I actually did was walk into other people's histories, into libraries and attics and loft storage rooms where families had deposited 3 generations of accumulated objects, and I assess what was genuine and what was not, what was worth protecting and what could be released without consequence. I read provenance documents and handled things with cotton gloves and wrote reports that determined whether an estate was worth $400,000 or $4 million. I was precise. I was thorough. I noticed things. That last part turned out to matter more than anyone in my family anticipated. The symbolic object came to me on a Tuesday in April, the year I turned 30. I was doing a routine estate inventory for a retired professor named Eleanora Fitch in Hyde Park, a neighborhood on Cincinnati's east side. Eleanora was 78 and had spent 40 years teaching art history at the University of Cincinnati. Her house was what you would expect: tall ceilings, bookshelves that reached them, rooms arranged around the acquisition of beautiful and specific things. She had called Castellan because she was beginning the process of deciding what her estate would look like, not the morbid kind of planning, the practical kind. The kind that says I have spent a lifetime building something and I intend for it to go somewhere with intention. On the 3rd day of the inventory, she sat beside me in the front parlor while I catalogued a set of pressed botanical illustrations from the 1870s, and she watched me work for a long while without speaking. I had placed a small square of archival foam beneath the frame of the 4th illustration to keep it level on the table, and I was examining the versa with a loupe, looking for the printer's mark. She said without preamble, "You see what other people walk past." I looked up. That is a skill that most people are not born with. It can be practiced, but it cannot be manufactured. You either see things or you do not. I did not know what to say to that. She went to the sideboard near the window and came back with something in her palm. A folding ruler. An old one, 12 inches, pale yellow with age, the kind that was made of boxwood before it was made of plastic. The brass hinges at every joint were tarnished to a warm brown, One side had measurement markings. The other side had been painted by someone years ago with a tiny repeating motif of dark blue morning glories. "This was my father's," she said. "He used it to measure things and also to show me that everything worth measuring has two sides." She set it on the table beside the illustration I was examining. "I would like you to have it." I started to decline. She lifted a hand. "I am not offering it to be generous. I am offering it because you will understand what it is." I took it. I did not fully understand it that afternoon. I put it in the left front pocket of the canvas bag I carried to every job, the pocket I reserved for things I touched without thinking: chapstick, a spare loop cap, loose change. It clicked against the other objects in a way that was immediately comfortable. By the following week, I had stopped noticing it was there, which means it had already become necessary. I thought about Eleanor's words on the drive back to the office that evening, past the river and the old trestle bridge, the city light just beginning to show against the early dark. "You see what other people walk past." I wondered what she would think about a family that had walked past me for 30 years without stopping to look at the verso. Castell and Associates occupied the third floor of a limestone building on East 4th Street in downtown Cincinnati, between a tax attorney and a very small gallery that changed its window display every 3 weeks. My supervisor was a man named Prentice Hollowell, 54 years old, silver-haired, with a way of talking that removed all drama from every sentence regardless of what was in it. He had been appraising art and estate objects for 29 years and operated under the conviction that accuracy was the only form of respect. On my first week at Castellan, he had told me, sitting in his office with a stack of catalogs and a cup of tea he never actually drank, "The object does not care what you think of it. It is either what it is or it is not. Your job is to determine which and to say so without apology." Over 6 years he had become not exactly a mentor in the formal sense, not someone who made speeches or delivered lessons, but someone who said what was true in the plainest possible register and expected you to be capable of receiving it. He delivered hard information the way a contractor delivers a foundation inspection report. "Here is what I found. Here is what it means. Here are the options." Beverly had met Prentice once, at a firm event I had brought her to when I was first promoted to senior appraiser. She had shaken his hand, smiled the smile she reserved for people she had decided were not worth full attention, and said to me afterward in the car, "He seems very dry." She meant it as a criticism. I had taken it as a compliment on his behalf. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where today we are sitting with the particular weight of being underestimated by the people who were supposed to be paying closest attention. This episode is about what happens when someone spends years building a life in plain sight, and the people who should have been curious never once stop to look. If you have ever been invisible to someone who is supposed to know you, stay with me. Leave a comment below and tell me what state or country you are listening from. Subscribe if you have not already. I want to make sure this finds everybody who needs it. The first time Thatcher used the word hobby in reference to my work, I was 31 and we were at Easter dinner at our parents' house in Westerville. The table had been set with the good china Beverly brought out for occasions she considered worth the china, and the occasion this year was that Thatcher had just been made a regional director at Landmark Criterion, which Beverly had announced before Grace, while still holding the ladle for the gravy. I had been promoted to senior appraiser 6 weeks earlier. I had not mentioned it. Not because I planned to conceal it, but because I had learned, with the quiet exactness that characterizes my work, that information offered to my family without an audience predisposed to receive it simply dissolved in the air. We were between the main and the dessert when the Landrum cousins, a family from my father's side who came to Easter most years, asked what I was doing professionally. Gerald started to answer, but Thatcher cut in with the ease of someone who did not notice he had done it. "Margot does appraisals. Art stuff, antiques, that kind of thing." A pause. "She's good at it. It's a good little side thing." Side thing. I noticed my own reaction almost from a distance, the way I notice when a painting's crackle or does not match its supposed age. A quiet signal. A thing that does not match. I did not correct him. I smiled and passed the breadbasket. But I thought, sitting there with my good china plate and my glass of white wine and my 11 years of training and my certification and my senior appraiser title, I thought about what it meant to be accurately seen, about how Thatcher had never once asked me what I actually did in a day. Not once in 4 years of sitting at the same tables had he asked a single specific question about the work. He had decided the shape of it without any evidence, and he was comfortable in that decision the way people are comfortable in furniture that fits them. That was the first time he said side thing. It would not be the last. Over the following 2 years I heard variations of it with a regularity that began to feel intentional. At Thanksgiving, Thatcher told a colleague of Gerald's who had asked about me. She appraises things, old objects. It's more of a passion project than a career. At Christmas, explaining to Portia's parents why I was not bringing a significant other. Margot's very devoted to her hobby. It tends to be all-consuming. At a summer barbecue in Dublin, when someone from the neighborhood asked what I did, he laughed a little before answering, as though he were about to translate something from a language they would not know. She works with antiques. Sort of an art thing. Sort of. I noticed what I noticed. I filed what I filed. I said almost nothing. The folding ruler stayed in my bag. The year I turned 32, Castell & Associates received a contract that changed the shape of what I understood my work to be. An estate named the Wellgate Collection, held for decades in a family trust with unclear provisions, was entering a legal dispute between two branches of the same family over the assessed value of its contents. One side claimed the collection was worth approximately $2 million. The other side, represented by a Cincinnati estate attorney named Dorothea Page, believed the figure to be dramatically understated and had brought in Castellan to conduct an independent valuation. Prentice assigned me as lead appraiser. The Wellgate Collection occupied a climate-controlled storage facility in Mariemont, a room the size of a large bedroom, floor-to-ceiling wire shelving, every object tagged and bagged and catalogued, with a reference code from a system that had last been updated in 2001. I spent 11 weeks in that room. I wore cotton gloves and read provenance documents by the light of a portable lamp I brought from the office. I handled objects with the kind of careful attention that is not reverence exactly but is close to it. The kind of attention that says, I will not miss what you are. The final valuation report I produced was 94 pages. The collection's assessed value was $7 million. Dorothea Page sat across from me in Prentice's conference room when I presented the findings, a woman in her early 60s with reading glasses on a chain, and the specific patience of someone who has spent decades being right in rooms full of people who were not listening. She reviewed the report with her glasses up and the chain hanging. When she reached the section on the collection's most significant piece, a small oil panel attributed to a workshop in the southern Netherlands, circa 1490, she looked up. You confirmed the attribution? The panel painting had provenance documentation in a language the previous cataloguers had not read. Low German. I had it translated. The record traces the piece through 4 owners over roughly 300 years. I folded my hands on the table. It's the most valuable object in the collection by a margin of roughly $1 million. Dorothea looked at me over her glasses. The previous assessors walked right past it. I said nothing. There was nothing to add. Prentice from the far end of the table said very quietly, she tends to find what other people missed. The case settled favorably for Dorothea's client. Castellan received a letter of commendation. Prentice put it in a frame and hung it on the wall beside the window, where it received afternoon light. And my name was in it. Beverly's response, when I told her about the case over the phone, was to ask whether Thatcher had mentioned that Portia was thinking about redecorating their kitchen. I held the phone a long moment. Sage settled in my chest like silt after a disturbance. Then I said yes, I thought I had heard something about that, and I changed the subject without letting her know I had changed it. I have spent a long time thinking about what drove Beverly's behavior. I do not say this to excuse it. But I've done enough estate inventory work to understand that people are shaped by what they were forced to prove, and there are times when I can see the outline of the person Beverly had been before she became the person she was at our dinner table. She grew up in a factory town in eastern Ohio. Her father worked a line at a rubber plant and her mother cleaned houses on alternating Thursdays. Beverly had been, by all accounts, a bright student, the first in her family to attend any college, and she had married Gerald before she finished her degree, not because she was forced to, but because in 1984, in that town, the calculation still looked like it was worth making. She had been told her whole life that success looked like a certain thing. and she had organized herself around that image with the discipline of someone who had been told they had no room for error. I understand that. I do not forgive it. Understanding why a person does something is not the same as forgiving it, and the difference between those two things matters. What she passed to Thatcher was more than preference, it was a whole architecture of what counted. He absorbed it without knowing he was absorbing it. He repeated it without knowing he was repeating it. He dismissed my career the way someone dismisses a feature on a map they have already decided not to visit. That architecture was about to cost him a very specific amount of money. In January of the year I turned 33, I received a call from a man named Clark Dunmore, who was the trust officer at a private bank in Columbus called Hartwell Meridian. He had been referred to me by Dorothea Page. He had a client, an 84-year-old man named Arthur Fenwick, who had been slowly liquidating a private collection of mid-century American studio ceramics and folk paintings over the preceding 4 years, and who had recently become concerned that the sequential private sales arranged by his nephew had not been getting full market value. I met Arthur Fenwick 3 weeks later in a brick house near Bexley, a neighborhood of old money and studied quiet on Columbus's east side. He was small and thin and sat in a high-backed chair near a window with a view of a bare winter garden. He had the manner of someone who had long since stopped expending effort on impression management and was now only interested in accuracy. My nephew has been handling the sales, he told me, without preamble. I'm told you're the kind of person who notices things. I try to be. I need you to look at what's left. He gestured at the room around him. And I need you to tell me whether what was sold was worth what it was sold for. I took the job. What I found over the next 6 weeks was not fraud exactly. It was something quieter and in some ways more corrosive. The nephew, a man named Drew Fenwick, who worked in residential real estate and had been managing his uncle's collection since Arthur's wife died, had been selling pieces through a dealer he had a pre-existing relationship with, at prices consistently 30 to 45% below what a properly sourced buyer would have paid. There was no transaction where the price was technically wrong, but there was a pattern, legible only to someone who knew the market and had the time to examine 12 separate sales across 4 years, in which a collection worth substantially more than it appeared had been gradually transferred at a discount. I wrote a 74-page report. I sent it to Clark Dunmore. I sent a copy to Dorothea Page, who had arranged the introduction and who, it turned out, was already corresponding with Arthur Fenwick's estate attorney. The matter was handled privately. Arthur restructured the trust. Drew Fenwick was removed as collection manager. The final accounting was not made public. But Arthur Fenwick, 3 months after I submitted my report, sent me a note on heavyweight stationery in a handwriting that was old-fashioned and very precise. He thanked me for my thoroughness. He said I had seen what others had been paid not to see. He said he hoped I understood the value of what I did. I read it twice. I put it in the inner pocket of my canvas bag, beside the folding ruler. Beverly never asked about that work. Thatcher never knew it existed. There was no dinner in their honor for any of it. I kept going. The following March, Thatcher did something I was not prepared for. Which is to say, he did something generous. His firm had been retained to assess the commercial real estate value of a mixed-use development on Columbus's short north, and during a call with one of the project's architects he had mentioned, apparently without much calculation, that he had a sister who appraised things. The architect's wife collected art. They were in the middle of building a new house with significant wall space and no idea what they owned. Thatcher passed them my name. I took the appointment. The clients, a couple named the Bryars, had a modest but interesting collection, mostly regional Ohio artists from the 1950s and 60s, the kind of work that had been bought for love rather than investment, and had quietly appreciated because love turned out to be good judgment. I spent 2 days at their house and produced a thorough report and came away with a retainer for ongoing acquisitions consulting. I called Thatcher to thank him. "Sure," he said. "Happy to help out with the hobby thing." There it was again. I did not argue it. I thanked him and ended the call and sat in my car outside my apartment building for about 4 minutes without doing anything. He had done something genuinely kind and managed to diminish it in the same breath, not out of cruelty. Out of a map he had drawn so long ago he could not see it anymore. That was the most expensive mistake of his life, and he had no idea yet. The accident with the email happened in October of the year I turned 34. My mother had a habit of using her personal email for family communication and forwarding things to contact names she had memorized by first name only. She had been doing this long enough that the habit had hardened into unconscious routine. On a Thursday evening at 7:14 p.m., a message arrived in my inbox from beverlyvoss@gmail.com with the subject line, "Thatcher's thing, your thoughts." She had meant to send it to her sister, my Aunt Gail, whose name in Beverly's contacts also began with G.A. My contact name was simply Margot. My aunt's name was Gail. I have no idea what sequence of distraction produced the misdirect, but it happened. I opened it over takeout Thai food at my kitchen table. The email was Beverly writing to Gail about a conversation she had with Thatcher that afternoon. Thatcher had apparently told her that the Breyer clients had given him a referral past his name to another developer they knew. He was being thanked, in other words, for putting them in contact with me. Beverly's email to Gail read, "Well, he says he sent them Margot's way and it went fine, they liked her well enough. I suppose the little art thing can be useful for something." Portia called it adorable. I don't like that word applied to a grown woman, but I understand what she means. She just does her thing, doesn't push for anything more. I suppose there's a peacefulness to that. Thatcher did well to think of her, that was generous. Though I do wish sometimes she had done something with more room to grow. The art hobby was always going to have a ceiling, you know. Adorable, a ceiling. The little art thing. I read it slowly, the Thai food cooling, the window dark behind me. I noticed my reaction almost from a distance, the way I notice a misattributed signature, a discrepancy that is small enough to ignore if you are not looking but is unmistakable once you see it. A particular tightening in the chest. The specific feeling of being seen through a lens that was never going to be ground correctly. I saved the email to a folder I made that evening. I named it before the balance shifts. Then I ate my dinner and went to bed. Here is something I have learned about working with other people's histories. The moment when what something is worth becomes undeniable is rarely dramatic. It is not a revelation from a mountaintop. It is usually just a record sitting in a file in a room where someone who knows how to read it finally looks. The object does not announce itself. The record does not shout. The truth simply becomes available to anyone willing to open the right drawer. Beverly had been writing her own record for years. She simply had not read it back. I went to the holiday dinner in December because I went to the holiday dinner in December. That was a fact about my life. The way the folding ruler in my bag was a fact. Thatcher and Portia were there with their 2 children, Breyer and Cole, 8 and 6 respectively, at an age where they still found the table exciting and had not yet learned the performance it required. Gerald was in his element with the carving knife. Beverly had made the dining room look like a catalog page. The moment that mattered came before dinner, in the front hallway when I arrived. I was hanging my coat when Portia came through with her wineglass and saw me and said, very brightly to no one in particular, "Margot, are you still doing your little appraisal thing?" Still. Little. Thing. 3 words applied to a career that had just produced a 74-page report that restructured a multi-million-dollar trust. Beverly appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Isn't she? We love it. It keeps her busy." She said busy the way someone says comfortable when they mean limited. Thatcher came down the stairs at that exact moment, drinks in both hands, and caught the tail of the exchange. He grinned. "She's very devoted to the hobby." "I will say that." 3rd time. I smiled. I took my coat into the hall closet. I felt nothing from the outside. From the inside, I was filing it. If you have ever had your life described back to you by someone who had never asked a single question about it, you know what that filing feels like. It is not rage, it is something colder and more precise. Leave 1 word in the comments if you know what I mean. Just 1 word. And stay with me, because what happens in the next part of this story begins in the back room of an estate house that nobody in my family has ever seen. In February of the year I turned 35, Prentice Hollowell called me into his office and sat across from me and put a single page on the desk between us. It was a letter from a national auction house, a very old and well-regarded one whose name I will not use because the matter it pertained to is still in process. The letter was an inquiry. They were conducting a preliminary assessment of a privately held estate in Greater Cincinnati, and they needed a certified appraiser with documented expertise in pre-1600 European panel painting to consult on a specific piece. Prentice had told them he had exactly one person who fit that description. The fee is $18,000 for the preliminary assessment alone, he said, with the same tone he would use to tell me the weather. What's the piece? He turned the letter toward me. The piece in question was a small panel painting, tempera on wood, attributed to an early 15th century illuminator in the Burgundian tradition. Privately held since the 1940s, never publicly exhibited. The owning family had recently commissioned an independent assessment before consummating an insurance reclassification. I took the job. The panel was housed in a converted carriage house attached to a large property in Indian Hill, and the moment I saw it, I understood why the auction house was involved. It was small, roughly 14 by 10 inches, in a frame that was entirely wrong for it, a Victorian edition that someone had made in the 1880s without any understanding of what they were framing. The surface was intact. The paint layer was astonishing. I spent 4 hours with it before I said anything to the family's representative, who had been waiting in the adjacent room. When I came out, she asked, "Well?" I said, "You should call your attorney before you reclassify the insurance." She understood what that meant. The subsequent provenance research took 6 weeks. It involved a document held by a private collector in Basel who had been trying to identify the piece's origin for 20 years and had never been able to source it to a workshop. I reached him through a colleague. I had 3 documents translated from Middle French. I drove to Pittsburgh to examine a related work in a university collection that I needed to see in person. The preliminary attribution I produced was, by any measure, a significant one. The piece was not merely an early 15th century work in the Burgundian tradition. Based on the documentary evidence I assembled, it was consistent with the known output of a specific workshop with an established market record. The assessed value range in my preliminary report was $2, $1 million to $3, $4 million to $3. 4 Million's representative called me when she received it and did not say anything for a full 4 seconds. Prentice sat across from me the morning after I submitted the report. He had a cup of tea he actually drank this time. He set it down and looked at me. "You have been in this office for 6 years, he said. "And I have watched you produce work that the field will not fully recognize for another decade. I want you to understand that." He said it the way he said everything else. Plainly, without theater. I looked at him for a moment. "Thank you. I am also increasing your equity stake in the firm." He pushed another piece of paper across the desk. "Effective immediately." I should have done it a year ago. He turned back to his calendar. Subject closed. I held the paper on my way out of his office. I thought of Beverly saying she wished I had done something with more room to grow. I thought the room was never the problem. In April, Thatcher called me. He was calling about Arthur Fenwick. Not about my work for Arthur Fenwick. He had not known about that. He was calling because Landmark Criterion had been approached by a development group that wanted to assess the commercial value of the Bexley property. Arthur Fenwick had died in March, at 87, quietly in the chair near the window where I had first met him. His estate was in process. The property was expected to come to market. Thatcher's firm had been contacted. He mentioned it casually, the way he mentioned most things. Should be a decent commercial listing if it clears probate without too much drama. I said, "I know the Fenwick estate." A pause. "You do?" "I did work for Arthur Fenwick 2 years ago. He was a client." Another pause, a different kind. "When you say work?" "Appraisal work." "Appraisal work. A collection assessment that resulted in a trust restructuring." Silence. Long enough to be meaningful. "That was you?" "Yes. I heard about that job. Clark Dunmore talked about it at a Hartwell Meridian event." His voice had changed. Something had shifted in it. "He said it was exceptional work. He said the appraiser had found documentation that nobody else had been able to find in 20 years. That was me." Another silence. Thatcher was doing math I had been doing for years. Recalculating the surface area of a thing he had been calling small. "Margot." He stopped. "You were going to say something." "I was going to ask how you knew Dorothea Page." I let a beat pass. "She refers clients." "I do good work." He did not say anything else about it on that call. We talked about logistics for a few more minutes and ended the call normally. But something had moved in him and I knew it, and he knew I knew. He still did not know about the panel painting. He did not know about New Jersey Business Monthly. Wait, I am in the wrong story. He did not know about the auction house inquiry, or the preliminary report, or the $3.4 million ceiling on the assessed value. He did not know that Prentice had just increased my equity stake. He did not know about the letter from Arthur Fenwick in my canvas bag beside the folding ruler. He only knew that Clark Dunmore at Hartwell Meridian had called my work exceptional at a social event. For Thatcher, that was almost enough to change the picture. Almost. Because he went home that evening and told Portia, and Portia told Beverly, and Beverly called me 3 days later and said, "I heard from Thatcher that you did some work for a family in Bexley." I did. He said it was a big deal. It was a significant assessment, yes. A pause. "Well, that's wonderful, sweetheart, you've always had a good eye." She said it the way you say an observation about the weather, noting it, then moving past it. "Thatcher's been absolutely swamped lately. Have you heard about this new development he's working on in the short north?" There it was. Redirect completed. I said yes. I had heard, and I listened for 4 minutes about Thatcher's development, and then I said goodbye and hung up and sat with the particular feeling of having offered something real to someone who immediately turned it into background noise. I saved the feeling in the folder. Now, let me tell you what the weapon was. Because by this point in the story you already know about the panel painting and the trust restructuring and the equity stake and the 6 years of documented work. But what I have not told you yet is about the list. In March of the year I turned 35, 2 weeks before Thatcher called me about the Fenwick property. The Cincinnati chapter of the American Society of Appraisers published its annual directory. This is a document that most people do not know exists, and fewer still have ever read. It lists accredited appraisers, their specializations, their firm affiliations, and their professional history. It runs to about 200 pages. It is available online, fully indexed, searchable by name. On page 47, under Specialists in European Pre-Modern Works on Panel, my name appeared with a note that cited the Wellgate Collection valuation and the Fenwick Trust assessment, and the pending work on what was described, without specifics, as a significant private panel painting currently under preliminary attribution review. My full name, my firm, my contact, my documented record. Also in March, a regional business journal called Ohio Commerce Monthly ran a feature on privately held wealth and succession planning in the greater Cincinnati area. One of the case studies in the piece, written with the identifying details changed but the professional information intact, described an appraiser who had located a mid-century ceramics collection being systematically undersold and restructured the trust around a corrected valuation. Dorothea Page was quoted without identifying the case, saying the appraiser's work had recovered what she conservatively estimated at $600,000 in estate value for her client. Prentice saw the article before I did. He set it on my desk without comment. My name was not in it. But the description was accurate to a professional detail that anyone in the Cincinnati legal and financial community would know immediately. Dorothea Page sent me a text message the morning it ran. "People know it's you." I wrote back, "I know." I did not call my family. I let it run. That phrase, "I let it run," is not a strategy exactly. It is more of a posture. The posture of someone who has decided that the record exists without her help and the record is sufficient and she does not need to carry it to people's doors herself. The truth is its own kind of freight. You do not have to haul it. Prentice put it a different way. I had come into his office in late March to go over the panel painting's preliminary report one more time before submitting the final version to the auction house. He was sitting with it spread across his desk, reading glasses on. He looked up. "The other side of this attribution is that somebody had this thing for 80 years and had no idea what they had." Correct. They walked past it every day thinking it was a Victorian curiosity. Yes. They wrote their own assessment, he said. They just never read it back. He returned to the report. I sat down and picked up my pen. The folding ruler was in my bag on the chair beside me. I could feel it the way you feel an object that has been in your orbit long enough to become part of the furniture of a thought. I let it run until May. And then, in the second week of May, Thatcher did something that closed the distance for him. His development group had been trying to acquire a property in the short north for 8 months, and the acquisition had stalled on an object in the building's contents that the sellers were using as a reason to delay closing. It was, of all things, a piece of artwork. A large-scale oil on canvas attributed to an Ohio artist from the 1950s, which the sellers claimed was a significant work worth more than it had been appraised at in the initial commercial real estate assessment. Thatcher's team needed a certified appraisal that could be filed in the purchase and sale agreement. His firm's attorney recommended they get a specialist. Thatcher called me, not for anything hobby-related, not to pass my name along. He called me because his attorney had done a search and come back with a name, and the name was mine. Because the American Society of Appraisers directory that had been sitting on page 47 since March was exactly the kind of document a real estate attorney searches when they need a specialist and they want to get it right. He called me at 10:15 on a Wednesday morning. I was in my office with coffee and a fresh provenance file. "I want to hire you for a commercial appraisal." I waited a moment. "Which piece?" He described it. I knew the artist. I knew the approximate market range. I said I could take the job and quoted him my current hourly rate. A pause. "That's higher than I expected." "That is my rate." Another pause. "Okay. Yes, that works." He hired me. Another pause. "Okay. Yes, that works." He hired me. He sent the engagement letter to my firm's email. He paid the retainer within 48 hours. I spent 4 days with the piece. I produced a 28-page report. The assessed value came in at $340,000, substantially above what the sellers had been claiming, which meant the commercial transaction needed to account for it. Thatcher's team restructured the offer. The deal closed. His attorney sent a formal thank you letter to Castellan Associates. Prentice put it on the stack. Thatcher did not say hobby. Not once during the engagement. He said Margot, and he said thank you, and he said good work when the report came back. 3 weeks later, our parents had a summer barbecue. The kind they held every year in late June, the kind where Gerald grilled and Beverly managed the social choreography and the neighbors came through in 2-hour rotations. I arrived at 3-tone. Thatcher and Portia were already there. By the time Gerald was serving the first round of burgers, Thatcher had told everyone within earshot about the Short North deal. He told it the way people tell stories about accomplishments that required difficult logistics. He mentioned in passing that he had brought in a specialist for the art component. Gerald from the grill said, "A specialist? Who did you use?" Thatcher said, "Margot." He did not say side thing. He did not say hobby. He said my name. Beverly was at the picnic table. I watched her face without appearing to. A small recalibration moved through it, like a gear finding a new position. She looked at me. She looked back at Thatcher. She did not say anything. The Larsons from next door were standing nearby. Mr. Larson was a semi-retired accountant who had followed the exchange. "Oh, you do appraisals, Margot? I didn't know that. What kind of work is that?" I told him. Not the shortened version. The real version. The panel paintings and the trust restructuring and the provenance documentation and the fieldwork. I told him in the plain way Prentice had taught me without apology or performance. Just the facts of what the work was and what it required. When I finished, he said, "That sounds like serious professional work." It is. Beverly was very quiet through dinner. If you have never seen someone rearrange the furniture of a belief they have held for 20 years, it is a very specific sight. It does not look like revelation. It looks like someone sitting very still while something shifts underneath them. Subscribe so this finds the next person who needs to hear that the work was never the problem. And stay with me because we are almost to the part where what Beverly says next changes what the whole dinner meant. After Gerald cleared the main plates and before the dessert came out, Beverly came and sat beside me at the far end of the table. The Larsons had moved to the yard. Thatcher was playing catch with Cole near the fence line. "I read something," Beverly said, "in Ohio Commerce Monthly." She paused. "The article about estate values and succession planning. The one about the appraiser who recovered $600,000 for a client?" I waited. "That was you." Not a question. Yes. She set her hands on the table. She was wearing a green blouse and her good earrings, the one she wore to important occasions. She looked at the table for a moment. I have been describing your work wrong, she said. For years, I have been describing it wrong. Another pause. I did not understand what you did. I want you to know that I genuinely did not understand. I looked at her. You never asked. She flinched, small, but real. I know. Her voice was not thin the way it got when she was managing something. It was flat and undecorated. I don't have a good answer for that. I let that sit. The email you sent Gail, I said. The one about the ceiling. She went still. The backyard sounds continued around us. A lawnmower from somewhere down the block. Cole laughing at something Thatcher did with the ball. I received that by mistake, I said. It came to me instead of her. Beverly did not say it was not what it looked like. She did not say I was misreading it. She looked at her hands on the table and she did not say anything for a long time. Portia said adorable, I said. You did not push back on it. No. Her voice was almost nothing. I want you to know that I did not build my career to prove something to you. I built it because the work was worth building and because Prentice Hollowell told me on my first week that the object does not care what you think of it, and that is the truest thing anyone has ever said to me about this work or anything else. She looked up. But I want you to know what you were walking past, I said. Because that is what I do. I find what people walked past, and I say what it is. And this is what I am. Gerald had come out the back door with the dessert plates. He set them on the table and looked at us and read the scene with the specific acuity of a man who has spent 35 years knowing when something real is happening. He sat down across from us. He did not pretend he had not walked into something. He said, I owe you an apology. I have let your mother do the talking for both of us, and I have not said what I actually think. I waited. I think you are extraordinary at your work, he said. I did not take the time to understand it, and I let that laziness become a story I told myself about you, and I am sorry. He said it looking directly at me, not at the table. Not past my shoulder. I did not cry. My hands were steady. My voice, when I spoke, was the register I use for facts. I needed you to say that, I said. I needed you to say it 11 years ago. Yes, he did not look away. I know. Thatcher came across the yard with Cole on his back laughing and stopped when he saw the three of us at the table. Cole slid down and ran to Portia. Thatcher came over and pulled out a chair. What did I miss? I looked at my brother. He had called my work exceptional in the same breath he had called it a hobby. He had passed my name to the Briars out of a generosity he had not known how to speak without diminishing it. He had hired me because his attorney had done a search and found my record, and the record had done the work I had never been able to do in a family dinner conversation. I want to show you something, I said. I reached into my canvas bag. I took out the folding ruler. Pale yellow boxwood, tarnished brass hinges, tiny dark blue morning glories painted along one side. I opened it on the table. All 12 inches. Thatcher looked at it. What is that? A woman named Eleanor Fitch gave it to me 6 years ago. She said her father used it to show her that everything worth measuring has 2 sides. I turned it so the measurement markings faced up. Then I turned it the other way so the morning glories faced up. I carry it everywhere. It goes into every estate house, every archive room, every storage facility. Because? Thatcher asked. Because the side with the numbers tells you what something is worth on the market, and the side with the flowers tells you what it was worth to whoever made it. I folded it closed. Good assessment requires both. And bad assessment is usually just someone who only looked at one side. Thatcher looked at the ruler for a moment. Then he looked at me. I only looked at one side. Yes, I said. You did. He did not have an answer. But he did not reach for a different subject. He sat with it, which was more than most people do. Beverly picked up the folded ruler. She turned it in her hands. She looked at the morning glories through the gap where it closed. Then she set it down very carefully, the way people set down objects they have only just understood. The dessert sat on the plates and went largely uneaten. The financial outcome was documented by Prentice in a memo that he sent to the firm's advisory committee that July, as part of the standard quarterly review. My equity stake had produced, in the previous 18 months, a return that the memo described as exceptional by any measure for a firm of Castellan's size. The panel painting attribution had generated international attention in the specialist market. 2 further consulting contracts had come in directly from the auction house relationship. The Fenwick Trust work had resulted in a retainer with Hartwell Meridian Bank. Prentice said none of this to me directly, because Prentice communicated through documents when documents were sufficient. But he did leave the memo on my desk with a post-it that said simply, "Well done." I put it in my bag beside the ruler. Thatcher sent a referral the following month. Not commercial this time. A private client, someone his firm's managing partner, had been trying to help with an estate matter for 2 years. Someone who needed exactly what I did. He wrote in the referral email, and I have kept it, "She is the best I have seen at this work. She finds what everyone else walks past. No hobby, no side thing. Just the facts." I started working with the client the following week. Her name is Harriet and she is 71 and she has a storage room in Oakley that contains 50 years of her family's collected objects, and she has no idea yet what is in it. I do. In September I had dinner with Eleanor Fitch for the first time in several years. She was 83 and still sharp and still sitting in the front parlor of her Hyde Park house with the bookshelves and the botanical illustrations. I brought her a small jar of honey from a market near my apartment because she had mentioned once, years ago, that she liked it, and I had been meaning to bring some for longer than I could reasonably excuse. She saw the folding ruler in my bag when I set it on the chair. She said nothing. But she smiled the particular smile of someone who has given something away and been right about where it would land. We had dinner at her kitchen table. Simple food, things she had made herself. We talked about the panel painting and the Fenwick Trust and the current state of the attribution market. At one point she asked, without any particular weight on it, "And your family? Are they still calling it a hobby?" I thought about Thatcher's email. About Gerald at the barbecue table. About Beverly turning the ruler in her hands. "Less so," I said. She nodded. Objects have a way of eventually revealing themselves. So do people. She poured more tea. I held the warm cup and looked out her kitchen window at the dark yard and the faint orange of a street light through the hedge. This is what I know now. The people who take you seriously before the evidence is in are a different category of person than the people who take you seriously after. Both categories can share your dinner table and your last name and the same set of holiday photographs, but only one category knew what to look for. Gerald looked, eventually. Thatcher looked, when his attorney made him. Beverly is still learning which side of the ruler to read. I have not given up on her. But I am no longer waiting for her to finish before I continue. I carry the ruler because measuring requires both sides and because Eleonora was right that I see things others walk past. I carry it because the morning glories are there, even when you are only looking at the inches. I carry it because a good assessment does not begin with a conclusion, it begins with looking. Last Tuesday morning I sat at my desk in the Castellan offices on East 4th Street with the window open and the sound of the city coming up from the street. I had 3 files open and a cup of coffee cooling at my elbow and the folding ruler sitting flat on the desk where I had placed it to look at the morning glory side before I turned it over to get to work. Prentice stopped in the doorway on his way to his office. He looked at the ruler. New habit? Old one. He went to his office. I turned the ruler over and started measuring.